Welcome to the Michelle Rempel-Garner podcast.
Hello, fellow patriots. Canada has a new prime minister officially, and it also has a new cabinet. But that cabinet looks a lot like the old cabinet, and that's because new Prime Minister Mark Carney has elected to essentially bring in the entirety of Justin Trudeau's inner circle. So on today's show, I'm joined again by my good friend and colleague, Sean Schnell, veteran conservative political strategist. And we're going to break down for you everything that happened in the Mark Carney swearing in ceremony, what it probably means for the country, at least in the short term, and then go through a bunch of other issues as well, too, that came out of today, including potentially another carbon tax, and a whole variety of other issues, including the fact that one of the first things that Canada's new prime minister is going to do is leave the country. So, Sean, can I start with just a little bit of my take, my first takeaway from the cabinet, and then let's get into it. So the main thing that really stood out to me was that there wasn't a lot of change from Justin Trudeau's cabinet. So the Liberal team had started the week saying they pre-positioned and said that Mark Carney's cabinet would be smaller and focused on different things. But even the CBC said that, well, it's basically Justin Trudeau's cabinet. So what did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been getting a lot of this from the Liberals and from Mark Carney in particular over the last number of weeks of this don't believe your lying eyes sort of talking points from them. And we see a lot of recycled individuals from Justin Trudeau's cabinet. I think it actually would be worth going through and talking about some of them.
Where do you want to start?
So that people really understand. Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of the same front bench to begin with there. I think one of the most notable ones was Stephen Guilbeault and his return to cabinet, and in sort of a bit of an unusual titled role. And this is a minister who has had a lot of controversy within the Trudeau government.
Mm-hmm. I was actually shocked. Least. I was shocked that they kept him in. So let's unpack the Stephen Guilbeault appointment. So the Liberals earlier in the week tried to position that they leaked to the press that he wasn't going to be in environment and climate change per se. But then later in the week, they said essentially that he was getting a big promotion, and he did. So he's become the Quebec lieutenant, which is essentially, in a lot of ways, it functions as a deputy prime minister, particularly within the Liberal Party. He still retains Parks Canada, so he is going to have his thumb on policies that a lot of people in the country have concerns about. There's a big issue with regard to caribou in Quebec that has made a lot of people in the province very unhappy. So he's still going to be doing that. But as you said, he actually retains, he takes on the heritage file again and a bunch of other files that he's had before, where he's been rightly panned for being one of Trudeau's top censorship ministers. So before, you had Guilbeault being essentially the key cheerleader for a carbon tax and really disastrous policies that have shut down a lot of the energy sector in Canada or stymied its growth. And now you've added the censorship file to him, essentially. So I was actually shocked that they tried to position him as some sort of, that this was a fresh face that was going to bring real change. I think he's been given an enormous opportunity to influence a lot of the same types of policies he was championing before that cost Canadians a lot.
Yeah, I think if you are sending a message to Canadians, and that is one that I think people should be picking up on loud and clear, that the types of policies that have made life harder, that have made life more expensive, are on full display and status quo with this particular cabinet. And Stephen Guilbeault is a perfect example of that. He has been at the front of every poor decision that the Trudeau government has made. And like you said, the one major concern there has been the fact that he was the king of censorship when Trudeau was prime minister, pushing forward a number of controversial bills, couldn't answer questions about it at the time, and really ultimately had to be moved out of the way because it was causing the government so many problems, and then moved into a role which, as you were talking about in environment, was costing Canadian families, businesses, and farmers an enormous amount as they brought in all sorts of crazy environmental regulations and made life harder for Canadians. And
like, he's been kept in this role,
yeah,
which is
exactly.
There's no way that the Liberals can spin this as fresh faces. There's a few other big outstanding red flags for me. So the Liberals, something that hasn't been in the media as much in the last week, but really should be, is Canada's fentanyl crisis, the opioid crisis that's killing a lot of people. You have a Trudeau cabinet minister, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, who's been pretty open about his support for distribution through the state of hard drugs. They haven't walked that position back at all, and he's still in cabinet. But also, I think there's something, just briefly while we're going through cabinet, I want to talk about his inner circle of staff as well too. The two big interesting ones were Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould. So Chrystia Freeland obviously was the finance minister. You and I might disagree on this a little bit, but I always thought she was over promoted. When I was put into Stephen Harper's cabinet over a decade ago, I felt really blessed because I had the opportunity to go into a portfolio where I was really able to learn the ropes, really learn how to be a cabinet minister. But Freeland, she was put into these super senior portfolios right off the bat without a lot of real life experience. And I always thought she was kind of over promoted to her detriment.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, you've got Mark Carney, who he is her son's godfather or something like that. So
Something like that. Yeah.
Just to watch this play out over the last year, where he was the economic advisor, kind of came in, sort of stole her job, but still kept her in cabinet and had her in the shot. I thought it was just like an odd display. And it's continuity for Trudeau, right? Like, she was Trudeau's 2IC. She's still in a very senior role in cabinet. Transport is a huge file. And then you have Karina Gould, who ran in the Liberal leadership and wasn't in cabinet at all. So, to me, it's kind of telling that none of the supporters of Freeland and Gould. So if you are going to try and spin a narrative that the Liberal Party was trying to get change, you maybe would have put somebody in that had bucked the status quo of Carney, right? Because all of Trudeau's people kind of migrated over. It was very clear it was going to be a coronation. To say, like, look, we're maybe going to have some dissenting opinions around the table, constructive dissenting opinions, people who thought, that came out and said, look, we're just going to challenge you because that's what the party needs. But they didn't have any of that. It's literally all of Trudeau's people, his senior people. And I don't know who dissents in that. Like, it's just going to be more of yes on the same policies. That's what I took from the composition.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised to see Freeland there, to be honest, because she did so poorly in the leadership race that there wasn't even really an argument to have her come in. Sometimes after a leadership race, you're trying to bring a couple of camps together and mend fences and smooth some things over. But that wasn't really the case, because he was, like you said, in this coronation process as opposed to some sort of competitive leadership race. And she flamed out so dramatically in December. And I mean, there's been so much between now and what happened in late 2024, but she flamed out with this big dramatic exit, and we've already talked about all the coulda, woulda, shouldas there, but there's really not a great argument for why she should be in Canada. I mean, she was a disastrous finance minister. The deficits that she was putting up and the policies there, like abysmal. And so again, when we're talking about messages, like these and Canadians need to remember this. This is a choice. Like these are choices that Mark Carney is making that are sending messages to Canadians. And so the choice he made was to return the same cabinet ministers that had been responsible for all this economic hardship to Canadians and disastrous handling of their files back into positions of power. And so when you are looking at somebody like Freeland coming back into the cabinet, it really is a head scratcher as to what she's even doing there, and the message that he's sending to Canadians of no, she did a bad job. She didn't perform in the leadership race, but she deserves to be around the cabinet table making decisions. It's a bizarre message.
A big file. Like transport is a big file. And do you remember, Sean? I think she was doing a press conference in Prince Edward Island, and she claimed not to have a car, but she had a car and driver and got like a speeding ticket. And there's just, this is not somebody that I have confidence can fix some of the big problems that Canada is having in transport. I mean, look at Canada's airports, our airline issues, train. Like you wouldn't say that after 10 years of the Liberals, all of a sudden transportation is doing super well. And then you've put someone who's just been an abject failure in a serious file. Anyway, there's a couple of other signals that they gave, not necessarily in cabinet, but in the inner circle of staff, that says that it's the status quo. So there were a lot of eyebrows raised that Carney elected to bring on former Minister Marco Mendicino as his chief of staff. And Marco was turfed out of cabinet by Trudeau because he had really mishandled a lot of his files. You'll remember during the Emergencies Act hearing, it came to light that him and David Lametti is the former justice minister. He also was turfed from cabinet by Justin Trudeau, but Carney's brought them back. And Mendicino, during the Emergencies Act hearing, it came to light that him and Lametti had joked about unleashing a tank on the streets of Canada, right? There's those text messages. Right. Mendicino was wrapped up in this issue around moving Paul Bernardo out of to some sort of prison facility that wasn't secure enough for his level of crime, re-victimizing the family. Just some really boneheaded moves as a cabinet minister. And now he's put him in as the chief of staff. Like that's like Justin Trudeau failure at its worst. And then of course you've got the person who really set up the Trudeau era, Gerald Butts, coming in. Like they were all sitting in the swearing in today, and it just didn't send him. It sent the exact opposite message of what they were trying to say, which is, oh well, this is change. It's not change, And I'll just close my rant on this section with this. I've had some people say to me in the last week, I've done some media where people are like, oh well, the ballot questions changed, and my pushback to that is, oh, so so groceries are all of a sudden in the last 6 weeks, they're magically affordable now. Is that what you're saying? Oh, well, rent is magically affordable now, right? Is that what you're saying? Oh, well, so crime is magically down. And yeah, like, of course, the American tariff issue, it's a huge problem, but it's a problem that's making these failures that the Liberal government created worse. And for them to put this cabinet and senior staff team together that is Justin Trudeau 2.0, I don't see how Canadians won't see through that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you on this, and I think Canadians will see through this. I think that they recognize the really crass politics that is at play here when you've got this group coming out now, led by the new Prime Minister Carney, saying, well, don't take what we did for the last 10 years. Don't hold that against us, and don't believe any of the policies that we've put out there. We don't believe in any of that anymore. We've turned over a new leaf. We've got a new government, and that's the approach that we're going to take. There's nothing new. There's nothing changed about the only thing that has changed about this for them is the politics of it. And they still believe the same thing that they believed yesterday and 10 years ago. They still have the same approach. The only thing that has changed is the politics. They think that if they do try and message a little differently or politic a little differently, that they'll be given a fourth mandate. And Canadians need to really recognize that for what it is. And actually, there was one tweet that you had pointed out here from one reporter talking about what it means for a change in government.
This is Terry Newman. She's with the National Post, and she goes, the sarcasm on here was lovely. It says, when I want a big change in government, I elect the same one. And she's essentially pointing out here that this is the same government that we've had, right? So like with new, a new hood ornament. But I think that's actually a good segue into what was missing from this cabinet. And I think we have a clip from the CBC coverage today where one of the hosts talks about some of the big omissions from cabinet, not in terms of people, but in terms of regional representation.
Mm-hmm.
How has this changed when so many people are the same? Why are PEI and Alberta left out of the Team Canada cabinet? Why are there only 2 ministers west of Thunder Bay? There are 14 British Columbia MPs in the Liberal caucus. There is 1 cabinet minister. I know 4 of them aren't running, but you have Randeep Sarai, you have Terry Beach, you have Talib Noor Mohammed, organizers and fundraisers. So the regional priority and representation in this cabinet.
So the key takeaway here for me, I'm a Western Canadian MP. Mark Carney actually reduced the amount of representation in cabinet from Western Canada down to 2. And so it is entirely heavy on the other parts of Canada. And we're in a moment of national crisis where the Prime Minister of Canada should be seeking the opinion and viewpoint of everybody from Canada, from every region of Canada. And to me, it sent a signal that he wasn't interested in knitting the country together by omitting essentially Western Canadian cabinet ministers altogether.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be infuriating if it wasn't so predictable from the Liberals. This is who they are. They have shown a lack of respect and care for Western Canada for as long as anyone can remember. And so this is just a continuation of that type of an approach. But why this matters, again, is because this is a choice that Carney is making on day one of him being sworn in as prime minister. This and these types of choices send messages. And exactly like you're saying, is at a time of national crisis, he is sending a message to half the country that you don't actually have much of a voice at the table, if any. We don't have any representation around the table to convey your concerns, your thoughts, your opinions on these issues as cabinet is sorting this out. And that's a choice he made. And so Canadians need to recognize that and make sure that they're telling people that about the record, because now he's running on not only the record of the last 10 years of the Liberal government, but on his own. And every decision he makes is under scrutiny now. And this is a big omission and one that Canadians should be aware of.
And just, something popped into my head as well, too. It's really interesting because, again, another CBC host that is prominent, but kind of known for carrying the Liberals' water a lot, Rosie Barton. She made a really, I thought it was crass comment, but I think it was actually pushed from the Liberals. Do you have that clip? This is from the CBC coverage today.
I think Mark Carney would argue that he is the Alberta MP. He might also argue he's the MP from the North, given that he was born.
Sure, he doesn't have a seat in either.
Who knows?
That is just ridiculous. So you've got Rosie Barton on CBC claiming that Mark Carney is the Alberta cabinet minister. Mark Carney hasn't even been in the country much over the last, decade, 2 decades. And now they're trying to say that this guy who has probably spent 5 minutes in Alberta in the last decade, that he's the minister. He doesn't even hold a seat. He's never been elected. He doesn't hold a seat anywhere. And I highly doubt that he's, door knocked anywhere in the country, never mind talk to a regular voter in Alberta. So I just find that offensive. And you know why I find that offensive? Western Canadians, actually any Canadian from any part of the country, you could say the same thing about Quebec or Ontario. But if I came in and said, well, I'm an MP for Quebec, I mean, I'm obviously not. I want my voice from my
Exactly.
community heard with somebody there, and to just leave out Western Canada when he has people, particularly in British Columbia, like that it just blows my mind. And then to be like, oh, when he's the minister, like, come
Exactly.
on.
No, that's exactly the point I was going to make. Is like, yeah, well, I've visited Quebec before, but I don't pretend to understand what their issues or their perspective on major issues are. And
You
anybody,
talk to Quebecois in order to
any
understand that.
anybody from any region of the country understands this concept, right?
Yes.
Is somebody that isn't from there, that doesn't live there, that isn't a part of the community, that has friends and neighbors and shops at the businesses and talks to ranchers or farmers or business owners, etc. Like, you don't understand what the perspective is, and you don't have empathy for the people that you're experiencing life with. And so, for if that's his argument, if his argument is, well, I'm the voice for Albertans, I'm the voice for Northern Canadians around the cabinet table, it's ridiculous, and it won't fly.
No.
That will not stand. People won't accept that.
So I know that we have a sort of a grab bag of other issues that we wanted to get through in this episode too, because there's just been so much news that happened over the last couple of days. You actually flagged something to me that I think is an important point, which is Carney didn't really offer much in his speech again about what was happening next for the country, outside of one point. And you thought this was a surprising first act as Prime Minister.
So we were talking about the carbon tax?
No, we were going to talk. You had pointed out that his first act as Prime Minister wasn't to do something.
Oh, right, his first.
We'll get to the carbon tax in a second, but it was to leave Canada.
He's leaving. Yeah, he's getting on a jet plane and flying far away. And
also, it's not to go talk to any American counterparts on the tariffs, right? He's going to France and the UK.
Yeah, he's going to Europe. He's going to Europe, and it's interesting because this is a guy that has failed to answer criticisms about exactly how close a ties he has to Canada, because he has such strong ties with Europe, and he's even, in his own words, called himself a European in the past, and this has been something that's kind of dogged him through the leadership. And his first week here on the job, he's going to be leaving the country to go over to Europe. And so it raises a lot of questions, exactly what is going through his head here, because exactly like you're saying, at the time of national crisis with the Americans, he's leaving the country.
Well, and I mean, like, look, there's no doubt that Canada needs to build bridges with countries around the world. We always need to do that. It's just he announced this trip and then didn't really say, well, what the purpose was or what he was trying to get out of it, right? Like, what is the key metric for him to do this right now? And an example that I want to give is, like, is he going to Europe with a pipeline proposal for where we're shipping LNG or something over a period of time? He didn't telegraph any of that, and he also didn't telegraph in his comments today what his plan is for him to directly communicate with American counterparts on this, insane tariff issue that is being foisted upon us. So I thought that was really odd and a good point out. Now you talked about the carbon tax as well too. Yeah. The key thing that he didn't do for me on this issue today is that, a couple of weeks ago, when he was pressed on the issue of the carbon tax, he said, well, we might do something on the consumer carbon tax, but we're going to have this other carbon tax, right? And this is where he had that famous clip in Atlantic Canada a couple weeks ago. He was on the news and he kind of mocked steel producers. He's like, well, Todd, to the host, how much steel do you use? And now we have these, ridiculous tariffs on Canadian steel, I believe. And he's threatening to put another tax on it. So he's really, like, the Liberals are really trying to, I think, fool Canadians. You've got this, Carney is the archpriest of net zero. And he's like, well, I'm going to do something on this one tax, but on the other tax, I'm going to raise it. And the fact that there wasn't clarity on that, I think it's going to lead to a lot of instability for investors at a time when we need to be bolstering the Canadian economy.
Yeah, and I think that this is a critical question that Canadians need to be asking when they hear Mark Carney and the other now Liberals that are going to run around the country and presumably an election talking
Yeah.
about the fact that they now somehow don't support this version of the carbon tax, but support this. And so Canadians need to ask, well, what has changed? What has changed from 7 weeks ago, where they were standing up in the House of Commons, pounding on their desks, talking about how great the carbon tax was? What has changed? And the answer is nothing. Nothing has changed. Nothing has actually changed at all, other than they are going to Canadians asking for their votes. And they understand how damaging this policy has been to Canadian families and to businesses.
I don't think they
and
do.
They
No,
don't. They don't understand that. Well, actually, no, I'm going to push back on you. I think they do. I think they understand how ticked people are at this policy.
No, I
and
think they
that's why they
understand
want
how
their votes.
politically damaging this is to them. I don't think they give a rip how much it costs. Like Sean, like for me, I've watched Guilbeault and Carney, because like Carney, again, this was his role at the UN while he was sitting as the chair of Brookfield, right, putting this banking alliance together. And it was like a religion for them. Like there was no.
Here's my point: is they understand it enough to go to the polls on, and they will go back to exactly how they were after an election is over.
Fair enough.
And Pierre Poilievre was talking about this exact thing, saying they've not changed any legislation. They can't, because the House has been prorogued. This is all smoke and mirrors. And so they understand how ticked people are politically. There's one thing about the Liberals is they do understand politics, because they love to hold on to power more than anything else in the world, and they'll do and say anything to hold on to power. And so I think they understand the politics of it. And I think that the second if they, God help us, if they were ever reelected, I think the second they're reelected, they would reverse their decision on it immediately, and Canadians would be right back into it where they were, because nothing has changed. Nothing has changed.
I'm going to push back on you.
Push back.
I don't think that anything that they've done here is going to like permanently end a tax that has increased the price of everything on Canadians, stymied investment in the country, held off jobs, and like they're not going to change that. So Carney himself has said he's going to introduce another tax, a bigger tax. And he was trying to say, again, like going back to that CTV Atlantic interview, he's trying to say, oh, well, it doesn't actually impact consumers. And then the host was like, well, I think it kind of does. And, he mocked the host. He goes, well, how much steel do you use, Todd? Like without thinking about how ridiculous that was. So like, I think we both agree on these guys can't be trusted, that anything that they're saying or doing
100%.
is for political gain only, not to walk away from their, ideological zealotry on carbon taxation, ineffectual carbon taxation too. So like, to me, you're right. Like nothing's changed. This is what we're going to see over and over from these guys over the next few weeks, is they're going to try and get Canadians to think that everything that they've done and to ruin the country over the last 10 years, to weaken the Canadian economy, make life more expensive, that's just, oh, let's just forget about that and everything's changed. Nothing has changed. Like literally the cabinet's the same, their policies are the same. And this is why, I'm glad that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been out just showing a clear contrast on that for years now, right? No, we're eliminating the consumer carbon tax flat out. And like I'll just close my rant with this. Like, the parliamentary budget officer this week on a different but related topic. This is the oil and gas production cap that the Liberals put in place, which, by the way, they still support. It's going to cost. It was estimated that it's going to cost the Canadian economy $20 billion over a relatively short period of time, 54,000 jobs. And the Liberals aren't out saying, oh, well, we're going to eliminate that, we're going to, change those policies. No, you had Stephen Guilbeault, the new quasi-deputy prime minister, out on a podcast last week saying, well, I don't really think we need to build pipelines. In 10 years, we're not going to need them. On one hand, and on the other hand, saying, well, we need sovereignty and energy infrastructure. And it's like, well, pick a lane, guys. And I know which lane they're in. So anyway, it's frustrating to see that sort of bull hockey be foisted upon the Canadian electorate
No, absolutely. And the one point you made there about Pierre and the Conservatives being consistent on this, make no mistake for 1 second, that is the only reason the Liberals are even talking about something else. And we know that they're not going to do anything else. We know they're liars. We know where they are, but let's not kid ourselves. The only reason that they are out there playing politics with this is because of how effective the Conservatives have been in taking the voices of Canadians and putting them front and center and saying enough is enough with these policies that are killing jobs and businesses across the country. And that pressure from Conservatives and from Canadians is the only reason they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. The second that pressure is off, they will go right back to how they have been.
I just got a piece of analysis come through to me that I can share with you kind of live as we're recording the show here. So another sort of piece of sneakiness is that Mark Carney, he's talking about the consumer carbon tax. He can't totally eliminate it with an order in council, right? I'm just looking at exactly what the analysis says here. Because they've done it through a mechanism called order in council, the consumer portion of the carbon tax is hanging around. It's still on the books, right? So if they wanted to do this, like here's the thing, Justin Trudeau should have resigned. If he was going to resign a long time ago, the cabinet should have given some sort of indication that they wanted to change this, and they should have changed it, right? But they didn't. And because now they've prorogued Parliament and they don't have the power to change laws, right? It's all very sneaky. It's chicanery, and I just don't think that Canadians are going to buy it. But there is one.
I guess that's my point: is that Canadians should be asking why they didn't, and it's because this is who they are. This is what they believe in. They will not change. Don't believe what they say. Look at what they've done, and their record on this is very, very clear.
100%. Now they're trying to do this Jedi mind trick today. Like, let's change topics a little bit here. So there is one thing that you and I have seen through all of our years of campaigning against the Liberals that they do without fail every single time. So the pattern is this. This is their Jedi mind trick. When they are in trouble on an issue and they want to change the channel, or they want to cover it up, or they want voters to forget it, what they try and do is vilify in some way, either vilify or make someone look crazy who tries to challenge them with some sort of diversion tactic. So let me give you a few examples. So remember, so for Jody Wilson-Raybould, when she was sort of being the whistleblower on the SNC-Lavalin scandal, they personally vilified her, right? They had people go out and try to attack her credibility so that as a bearer of the message that her motives would be impugned. Okay, so that's like a very personal niche example of that. Then you had, during the pandemic, Trudeau was supposed to win a majority government by calling that election early. Remember, they got into a lot of trouble. They needed a wedge issue, so they put out the vaccine mandates, in spite of Royal Society recommendations on other ways to handle like all sorts of different issues. I digress. They put the vaccine mandate issue in the window. And then remember, Trudeau famously used a bunch of pejoratives to describe people who are vaccine hesitant, right? Mm-hmm. And then they kind of moved into, as after the 2021 election, anybody who tried to question the scandals, We Charity scandals, whatever, they just called it misinformation, right? Anybody, they'd be like, well, you're peddling misinformation. It's like, no, we're doing our job as opposition. And forget even opposition. Average Canadians are like, why are you doing this? Well, you're misinformationing things. They tried to do this again today, and I want to lay this out for listeners so that they know what to expect in the next 6 weeks in an upcoming campaign. Mark Carney used the word negativity, I think, over 25 times in his speech. Now's not a time for negativity. The Conservatives are negative. They put some of their senior cabinet ministers, Anita and Nan, had a tweet on this saying, now is not the time for negativity. I want to be very clear. This is the exact same thing they've done in every other of these situations. And they are trying to make it seem that anybody who is doing what you and I are doing right now, litigating the Liberals' record and asking whether, like, and clearly they don't deserve another 4 years, but saying, well, that's negative. Well, and will you indulge me in like a 5-second more rant here?
Go for
You know
it.
what's negative? It's like our constituents' paychecks are negative now, right?
Yeah.
Inflation has taken away their paycheck, their buying power. The cost of rent is a negative thing, right? The broken immigration system is a negative thing, but they're trying to own this word and say that no. There's really nothing wrong with any sort of issue that we've dealt with. It's just, you're just being negative. You're just spreading misinformation. Oh, Jody Wilson-Raybould, you're just being difficult. And I want Canadians to understand that this is an election posturing Jedi mind trick the Liberals hope to use to distract from their record. Rant complete. I don't know what you think of that, but like,
I agree. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think this is their way of also trying to insulate their brand new untested leader. This is a guy that has never gone through a rough and tumble campaign before, and the Liberal leadership race certainly wasn't that. We saw that at the debates and whatnot. And so I think that I think Mark Carney is a high risk candidate who is untested going into an election, who is prone to they may call them attacks, but really just criticisms of the Liberal record, of which he is now the standard bearer. And that 100%. Is an important reminder for Canadians, is that holding the Liberals accountable for their record, for their decade of failed policies, is not being negative. That is just called accountability. And so they may not like it. They may not want to talk about their record. They may not want to look at their 10 years of failure and the decisions that Mark Carney and his cabinet have made and are going to make. But sorry, that's the job you signed up for. That is the job brother. That you are asking Canadians to elect you to. And so you don't get to dictate the terms of the tone in which Canadians are going to talk about your record. So
that's right.
You may want it to be puppies and rainbows, but the Canadians that have lost income, lost jobs, that have had a really hard time making ends meet are going to talk in the way that they want to about these issues. And that is called accountability. That is the democratic process. And if Mark Carney doesn't like it, then he shouldn't have run for the job.
No, and just like just in closing, one more proof point on that epic rant that I totally agree with is even today they excluded certain members of the parliamentary press gallery from the swearing in. Like, these are accredited members. They said no, you just can't come in and ask this guy questions, right? And you're right. They want to insulate him. They don't want him to have to take any sort of accountability for the decisions that he made as a senior advisor to Justin Trudeau, as well as all the people that he's now surrounded himself with. But as we close, I know you want to talk about Justin Trudeau, how he left the job in images.
Yeah, we've got a couple pictures to put up, which we'll have to describe for listeners that aren't maybe watching this on YouTube. But Justin Trudeau finally out as Prime Minister after a many years that Canadians and Conservatives have been hoping for this. But he did leave a couple of images for Canadians to remember him by. And so the first one was earlier in the week here. I'll put it up and maybe you can explain what we're looking at here.
So you've got Justin Trudeau sticking his tongue out, basically in the same pose that he's known for in his blackface photos, stealing a chair out of the House of Commons. I don't know if he's stealing it. MPs can request to take their chairs with them, but you have to pay for it. But nonetheless, you've got him essentially recreating his blackface picture pose in the House of Commons. Not great. And then the second picture, I think, so his photographer, I think it's Adam Scotty, he put out this gallery of pictures that he took, and it's literally Justin Trudeau looking into empty cupboards. And I think both you and I were like, what a way to cap your career is a photo of empty cupboards, having left the cupboards bare. And that is what the Liberal Party of Canada does.
Yeah,
to
I
our
mean, we don't have
country.
enough time here to talk about the legacy of Justin Trudeau, but those two images certainly they're a good start. Unserious and leaving Canadians in just a disastrous state of affairs.
Well, and on that note, there's going to be a lot more things that are coming down the pipe in the next week. It's probably going to be one of the busiest weeks in Canadian politics in a long time. So for those of you who have made it this far, don't forget to click auto subscribe or auto download to this podcast, wherever you're getting it from. Subscribe to this channel, subscribe to the Substack if you're getting it off of Substack. And thank you for tuning in. And we'll keep working hard for you. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening. If you want even more political news, subscribe at michellerempelgarner.substack.com. And if you like what you hear, be sure to share this podcast.